Bullies threaten new black boy. 10 minutes later, he takes all of them down. They thought the new kid from Memphis would fold like every other target they had ever chosen. 1 minute later, all 4 of them were on the ground, wheezing, staring up at the sky, wondering what the hell just happened. Monday morning, Jalen stood in front of Brookhaven High, watching streams of students pour through the main entrance. The building was newer than West Side, cleaner, with perfectly trimmed hedges and a school marquee that actually worked. But the faces were the same. The groups were the same. The unspoken hierarchies that every high school carried. They were all the same. He pulled his hoodie up and walked through the front doors. The hallways buzzed with the usual first-day energy. Locker slams, excited reunions, the nervous chatter of underclassmen trying to find their classrooms. Jalen kept his head down, following the schedule his guidance counselor had mailed him. Room 142. AP Biology with Mrs. Chun. He found a seat in the back corner, always the back corner, and pulled out his notebook. The other students filtered in, their conversations creating a familiar soundtrack of teenage life. Did you see what happened at Madison's party? Coach says varsity tryouts are next week. I can't believe we have Chun first period. She's brutal. Normal things. Normal teenage problems. For a moment, Jalen allowed himself to imagine being part of it. Then Brett Huxley walked in. Brett was exactly the type Jalen had learned to identify within seconds. 6'1", broad shoulders from years of baseball, the kind of confident swagger that came from never being challenged. His Letterman jacket hung perfectly on his frame, and his sandy brown hair was styled with the kind of casual precision that took actual effort. But it was his eyes that gave him away. Cold, calculating, always looking for weakness. Their eyes met for just a second across the classroom. Brett's gaze lingered, taking inventory. New kid, quiet, alone. His lips curved into the faintest smile. Target acquired. Mrs. Chun entered with the sharp click of heels on linoleum. She was a small woman, maybe 5'3", but her presence filled the room instantly. Good morning, class. I trust you've all had a restful summer because that ends today. Biology is not a subject you can coast through, and I am not a teacher who accepts excuses. She began taking attendance, her voice crisp and efficient. Jalen Knox. Here, he replied quietly. Louder, please. In my classroom, we speak with confidence. Here, Jalen repeated, his voice carrying this time. Brett turned around in his seat, studying Jalen with renewed interest. The quiet new kid who needed to be told to speak up. This was going to be fun. After class, Jalen was gathering his books when Brett approached. Up close, he was even more imposing, with the kind of practiced smile that never reached his eyes. Hey there, you're the new guy, right? Jalen. Yeah. Cool. I'm Brett. Been here since kindergarten, so I know pretty much everyone and everything about this place. He leaned against Jalen's desk casually. Where'd you transfer from? Memphis. Memphis, huh? Big city. Must be quite an adjustment coming to a small town like this. Brett's tone was friendly enough, but there was something underneath it. A probing quality. What brings your family to Brookhaven? Jalen finished packing his bag. Just time for a change. Right on. Well, hey, if you need anyone to show you around, let you know how things work here, I'm your guy? I know it can be tough being the new kid, especially when you're... Brett paused, letting his eyes travel over Jalen meaningfully. Different from most of the students here. The word different hung in the air like smoke. Not explicitly racist, but loaded with implication. Jalen had heard it before, in Memphis, in every school he'd attended. Different was code. Different meant other. Different meant target. Thanks, Jalen said simply, shouldering his bag. I'll figure it out. Brett's smile tightened slightly. Not the response he was expecting. Most new kids were eager for acceptance, grateful for any offer of inclusion. This one was what? Ungrateful? Proud. Sure thing, man. Sure thing. Brett stepped aside, but his eyes tracked Jalen as he left the classroom. See you around, Jalen from Memphis. By third period, the whispers had started. Who's the new kid? Some guy from Memphis. He's in my bio class. Barely talks. Weird, right? Just sits there. By lunch, it had evolved. That new guy is like, super quiet. Yeah, he's in my history class. Teacher asked him a question and he just mumbled. Maybe he's shy. Or maybe he's just weird. And by the end of the day, it had crystallized into something much worse. Mute. Jalen heard it first in the hallway between 6th and 7th period. Two girls whispering as he passed. That's him. That's Mute. He kept walking, but the name followed him. By tomorrow, it would be official. By the end of the week, some students would forget he had a real name at all. In algebra, his last class of the day, he found himself sitting 2 seats behind Brett. The class was working through practice problems when Brett turned around, just enough to make eye contact. You got a name, or just thinking all the time? Brett asked, his voice just loud enough for the surrounding students to hear. A few kids snickered. Mrs. Patterson looked up from her desk, but couldn't quite place the source of disruption. Jalen didn't respond. Not because he was scared. He'd learned that silence could sometimes buy peace. Not always, but sometimes. Brett smirked and turned back around, but not before flicking his pen cap toward Jalen's desk. It bounced off his notebook and clattered to the floor. Oops, Brett said without turning around. Butterfingers. More snickers. This time, Mrs. Patterson looked directly at Brett. Mr. Huxley, is there something you'd like to share with the class? No, ma'am. Just dropped my pen cap. Clumsy me. She stared at him for a long moment, then returned to her papers. Brett caught Jalen's eye in the reflection of the window and winked. Game on. The attack started small. They always did. Tuesday morning, Jalen's locker wouldn't open. He tried his combination 3 times before realizing someone had jammed gum into the mechanism. Pink gum, still soft, deliberately placed. As he worked to clean it out with a paper clip, he heard familiar laughter behind him. Lock problems, Mute. Jalen turned to see Brett approaching with 2 other boys. Lyle Martinez, short, stocky, with nervous energy and cruel eyes. Connor Walsh, tall, thin, the kind of kid who probably got picked on until he found someone weaker to target. Locks can be tricky, Brett continued, his voice carrying fake sympathy, especially when they get damaged. It's fine, Jalen said, finally getting his locker open. You sure? 'Cause Lyle here is great with mechanical stuff. Real handy. Aren't you, Lyle? Lyle cracked his knuckles. Yeah, I'm real good at fixing things. And breaking them. Jalen pulled out his books, ignoring them. But as he closed his locker and turned to leave, Connor accidentally bumped into him, hard enough to knock his algebra book to the floor. Oh man, sorry about that, Mute. Didn't see you there. The book had fallen open, and Connor stepped on it as he pretended to help pick it up, leaving a dirty sneaker print across Jalen's homework. Oops, clumsy me. They walked away laughing, leaving Jalen to salvage what he could of his assignment. This was how it always started. Small things. Deniable things. Accidents that weren't accidents. Misunderstandings that were perfectly understood. Soft war. Wednesday, broad escalation. Jalen's new hoodie, a gift from his uncle in Memphis, was in his gym locker during 4th period PE. When he returned from running laps, he found it slashed. Not destroyed, but damaged. 3 precise cuts across the back, just enough to make it unwearable. Coach Downing was leading stretches on the other side of the gym. The locker room was empty except for Jalen and the evidence of what had happened. He held up the hoodie, examining the cuts. They were clean, deliberate, made with scissors, not torn by accident. Someone had taken their time. Problem knocks. Jalen turned to find Coach Downing approaching. He was a stocky ex-Marine with gray hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that probably worked great with military recruits, but seemed lost on teenage boys. Someone cut my hoodie. Coach Downing examined it briefly. Looks like it got caught on something. These lockers can be rough on clothes. You should be more careful. Jalen stared at him. It was cut with scissors. I'm sure it was an accident. Things happen in locker rooms. Equipment gets damaged. You're new here, Knox, but you better toughen up. High school's not for the soft. Jalen looked him dead in the eyes. Got it, sir. Downing nodded like he'd delivered some fatherly wisdom and walked away, leaving Jalen alone with his destroyed hoodie and the growing realization that the adults weren't going to help. They never did. Thursday was the lunch incident. Jalen had learned to sit alone, usually at a table near the emergency exit where he could watch the room and leave quickly if needed. He'd bought a sandwich and chocolate milk, nothing fancy, just fuel to get through the day. He was halfway through eating when Brett's voice carried across the cafeteria. Hey, look everyone. Mute's having lunch. Jalen kept eating, but he could feel eyes turning toward him, conversations quieting, the familiar sensation of becoming a spectacle. Brett stood up from his table in the center of the room, the prime real estate where the popular kids held court. Lyle and Connor flanked him, along with a few other boys Jalen didn't recognize. You know what's funny? Brett continued, his voice projecting to the entire cafeteria. Some people just sit by themselves, all alone. Makes you wonder why, right? A few students snickered. Others looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene. This was how it worked. The audience was part of the show, even if they didn't want to be. Brett started walking toward Jalen's table. I mean, we tried to be friendly, tried to welcome him to our school. But some people just prefer to be antisocial, I guess. Jalen set down his sandwich and looked directly at Brett. No fear in his eyes, just steady assessment. Is there something you want? Jalen asked, his voice calm, but carrying clearly across the now silent cafeteria. Brett's smile widened. This was the first time the new kid had really spoken up, and he was doing it in front of everyone. Want? Nah, man. Just wondering if you're okay over here. All by yourself. Looking lonely. I'm fine. You sure? 'Cause it seems like maybe you think you're too good for the rest of us. Like maybe you think you're better than Brookhaven kids. The accusation hung in the air. It was a trap, and everyone knew it. If Jalen said he was better, he'd be labeled arrogant. If he said he wasn't, he'd be admitting to being antisocial or weird. I think I'm just trying to eat my lunch, Jalen replied. Brett laughed, but it was harsh, artificial. Right? Just trying to eat your lunch. Well, don't let us stop you. But instead of leaving, Brett moved closer. Close enough that Jalen had to look up at him. Enjoy your meal, mute. Then something happened that would be talked about for the rest of the week. As Brett turned to walk away, he accidentally knocked over Jalen's chocolate milk. The carton hit the floor and exploded, sending milk splashing across Jalen's pants and shoes. The cafeteria erupted in laughter. Oh man, sorry about that, Brett called out, already walking back to his table. So clumsy. Jalen sat in the spreading puddle of milk, watching Brett return to his throne in the center of the room. The laughter died down, but the whispers increased. He stood up slowly, gathered his things, and walked out of the cafeteria. His shoes squeaked with every step, and he could feel the milk soaking through his socks. But he didn't run. He didn't hurry. He walked with his head up, his shoulders straight, like Coach Milt had taught him. Never let them see you break. He could hear Anthony's voice in his memory. You can cry later, but never let them see you break. Thursday night, Jalen called Coach Milt. Milton Milt, Washington had been training fighters in Memphis for 30 years. He'd seen kids come and go, some making it to regional competitions, others just needing a place to work out their anger. But Anthony Knox had been special. And when Anthony died, Milt had made a promise to keep training his little brother. How you holding up, young blood? Milt's gravelly voice came through the phone. It's starting again, coach. There was a long pause. Milt knew what it meant. Same playbook. Same playbook. Different players. You remember what we talked about? Jalen was in his basement, sitting on the bench next to the heavy bag. His hands were already wrapped, ready for his evening training session. I remember. Tell me. Don't fight first. But if you have to, make it the last time. That's right. And what else? Sometimes you got to let people underestimate you. Let them think quiet means weak. Let them think different means less. And when they finally push too far, you show them exactly who you are. That's my boy. Now tell me, you think they're going to push too far? Jalen thought about Brett's smile, about the milk soaking through his clothes, about his slashed hoodie and jammed locker. Yeah, coach, I think they are. Then you be ready. But remember, this ain't about revenge. This ain't about showing off. This is about respect. About drawing a line and making sure everyone knows where it is. I understand. And Jalen, yeah, your brother would be proud of how you've handled this so far. Don't let nobody make you forget that. After hanging up, Jalen spent 2 hours on the heavy bag. Jab, cross, hook, uppercut. The combinations flowed like water, each strike precise and controlled. This wasn't angry flailing. This was the result of 6 years of dedicated training. 6 years of learning how to breathe while getting hit. How to stay up when your legs wanted to quit. How to use stillness to trap someone into thinking you were weak. He wasn't flashy. He didn't post videos online. He didn't talk about it. He just got good. Friday morning brought the final straw. Jalen arrived at school to find his locker decorated. Someone had taped a banana to the metal door with a note that read, "Welcome to the jungle," in Brett's unmistakable handwriting. A crowd had already gathered, some students looking ashamed, others snickering behind their hands. The racial implication was unmistakable, designed to humiliate and intimidate. Jalen removed the banana and note calmly, knowing everyone was watching. He crumpled the paper and threw it away, but kept the tape as evidence. Didn't appreciate your gift? Brett appeared with his usual entourage, speaking loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. Creative, Jalen replied, closing his locker with calm precision. But you might want to work on your handwriting. Makes it easy to know who sent it. Brett's jaw clenched. He wasn't used to his targets talking back, especially not publicly. Maybe you need a lesson in respect, Brett said, stepping closer. Or maybe you need a lesson in basic human decency, Jalen replied. The hallway buzzed with whispered excitement. Students began pulling out phones, sensing something big was about to happen. Brett's face flushed red. What did you just say to me? Jalen turned to face him fully, no longer pretending to ignore the confrontation. I said maybe you need to learn some basic human decency. You know, treating people like human beings instead of targets for your entertainment. The crowd pressed closer. This was unprecedented. Nobody talked to Brett Huxley like this. Not if they wanted to survive at Brookhaven High. You think you're tough? Brett's voice rose. You think because you're from the big city, you can come here and disrespect me? I think you're a coward who picks on people you think can't fight back, Jalen said calmly. And I think you've been doing it so long. You forgot what happens when you pick the wrong target. Brett's friends shifted nervously. This wasn't going according to script. Connor and Lyle exchanged glances, suddenly unsure. But Brett had gone too far to back down now. Not in front of half the school. Not after being called a coward. After school, he said, his voice deadly quiet. Parking lot. We settle this. Jalen nodded once. See you there. The crowd erupted in whispers as Brett stalked away, his crew trailing behind him. Students pulled out phones, texting frantically. Fight after school. Brett versus the new kid. This is going to be good. But as Jalen walked to his first class, he felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Relief. The pretending was over. The careful navigation, the strategic silence, the hope that maybe this time would be different, all of it was done. For the first time since arriving at Brookhaven High, he could stop pretending to be weak. And Brett Huxley was about to learn the difference between quiet and broken. The final bell rang at 3:15 p.m. Jalen walked slowly toward the parking lot, his backpack light on his shoulders. Behind him, he could hear the excited chatter of students following at a distance, phones already recording. This was it. The moment 6 years of training, for years of grief, and 3 weeks of humiliation had been building toward. His mother's words echoed in his mind. You better survive where he didn't. Anthony's letter crinkled in his back pocket. Don't fight first. But if you have to, make it the last time. Coach Milt's training flowed through his muscles like electricity. Jalen Knox was done being a victim. It was time to show Brookhaven High exactly who they'd been messing with. Do you want to know what happened next? The confrontation, the fight, and the aftermath that changed everything at Brookhaven High. Make sure you're subscribed because you won't want to miss how this incredible story concludes. The parking lot of Brookhaven High had never seen anything like this. By 3:20 p.m., nearly 100 students had gathered in a loose circle, their phones out, recording everything. The energy was electric, part anticipation, part fear, part excitement at witnessing something that would be talked about for years. Brett Huxley stood near his pickup truck, surrounded by his crew. Lyle was cracking his knuckles nervously. Connor kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. But it was the fourth figure that made several students gasp. Zeke McAllister. 6'2", senior, with the kind of mean eyes that suggested he enjoyed hurting people. Zeke had been suspended twice for fighting and had a reputation that extended beyond Brookhaven High. If Brett had called in Zeke, this wasn't just about humiliation anymore. This was about sending a message. Where is he? Brett muttered, checking his phone. It's 3:20. Maybe he chickened out, Connor suggested hopefully. Nah, Zeke said, his voice like gravel. He'll show. Guys like that, they got too much pride to run now. As if summoned by his words, Jalen appeared at the edge of the parking lot. He walked with the same calm pace he'd maintained all day, his backpack hanging normally from his shoulders. To the watching students, he looked impossibly small compared to the 4 boys waiting for him. But something was different about his movement. Where before he'd seemed withdrawn, almost invisible, now there was a precision to his steps. A focused energy that made the crowd quiet instinctively. Well, Brett called out as Jalen approached. Look who decided to show up. Jalen stopped about 10 feet away. The crowd formed a rough circle around them, phones capturing every angle. You brought friends, Jalen observed, his eyes moving from Brett to Lyle to Connor, finally settling on Zeke. Just making sure this is fair, Brett replied with a smirk. 4 against 1 seems about right for someone with such a big mouth. Jalen nodded slowly, then did something nobody expected. He set his backpack down carefully on the asphalt. Not dropped, not thrown, placed with deliberate precision. Then he rolled his shoulders, tilting his head just enough to stretch the tension out of his neck. The movement was so casual, so practiced, that several students in the crowd exchanged glances. That wasn't the motion of someone who was scared. That was the motion of someone warming up. All right, Jalen said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent parking lot. You want to do this? Let's do it. Brett lunged first. He was bigger, stronger, and had been in his share of fights. His punch was hard and fast, aimed directly at Jalen's face. But it was also telegraphed from a mile away. Jalen ducked under the swing so smoothly it looked choreographed. As Brett's momentum carried him forward, Jalen stepped in and snapped a quick jab to Brett's ribs. The sound echoed across the parking lot like a gunshot. Brett gasped, already stumbling, his eyes wide with shock and pain. He tried to recover, throwing another wild punch, but his breath was gone, his balance shot. Jalen simply stepped aside and watched him crumple to one knee. The entire exchange had taken less than 3 seconds. What the hell? Someone in the crowd whispered. Lyle came next, screaming with rage and rushing in with both fists swinging. Where Brett had been sloppy, Lyle was wild, all emotion, no technique. Jalen caught his wrist mid-swing and twisted, using Lyle's own momentum against him. A simple hip toss sent the shorter boy sprawling across the asphalt, where he landed hard and stayed down, groaning. Connor hesitated, suddenly realizing this wasn't going according to plan. But with the entire school watching, backing down wasn't an option. He threw a better punch than the others, straighter, more controlled, but still slow. Jalen deflected it with his forearm, stepped around Connor's guard, and gave him what looked like a gentle push. Connor flew backward into the side of a parked car with a metallic crash that made the entire crowd wince. 3 boys down in less than a minute. The parking lot fell completely silent except for the sound of heavy breathing and Connor's groaning. Then Zeke stepped forward. Where'd you learn that? He asked, his voice cold and clinical. Memphis, Jalen answered simply. Zeke nodded, as if that explained everything. All right, let's see if you learned enough. Unlike the others, Zeke didn't hesitate or posture. He charged like a linebacker, both fists swinging like wrecking balls, ready to end whatever fantasy Jalen was living. But Jalen didn't flinch. He stayed loose, balanced on the balls of his feet. Let Zeke come close. Too close. At the last second, Jalen pivoted, quick and smooth as water. Zeke's haymaker missed by inches, his own momentum spinning him sideways. That's when Jalen struck. One sharp left hook to the solar plexus. Not enough to break anything, just enough to knock every bit of air from Zeke's lungs. Zeke buckled, his eyes going wide, his face contorting as he struggled to breathe. But he recovered faster than the others. Sucked in air and threw a vicious right cross that caught Jalen's jaw. Not fully, more of a scrape than a solid hit, but enough to make him stumble a step. Zeke smirked through his pain. Thought so. You ain't that tough. Jalen just wiped the corner of his mouth with his thumb and asked calmly, You done? The question seemed to enrage Zeke even more. He came again, throwing combinations now, trying to overwhelm Jalen with sheer aggression. But anger makes people predictable. Rage makes them sloppy. Jalen weaved under each swing like he was built for it, his head movement smooth and natural. Then he countered with a clean 3-piece combination, jab, jab, cross, that landed with surgical precision. Zeke's legs gave out. The bigger boy hit the pavement hard, his arms splayed out like someone had unplugged his batteries. The parking lot was dead silent. For boys, 1 minute. They weren't unconscious. Jalen had been careful about that. They weren't bleeding badly, but they were finished, completely and utterly finished. People were filming now. That part Jalen hadn't planned for, but it was too late to worry about it. Someone across the parking lot yelled, "Wow!" He just took all of them down. All of them. Brett was trying to crawl to his feet, holding his ribs where Jalen's punch had landed. His face was red with pain and humiliation. "You're dead, man," he wheezed. "You're freaking dead." Jalen looked at him, steady, not angry, not triumphant, just tired. "No," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "I'm done pretending." Then he picked up his backpack and walked toward the bus stop, leaving 4 boys and 100 witnesses behind him. By 6 p.m., the videos were everywhere. Hashtags, Brookhaven fight, quiet kid snaps, 1 versus 4. The clips had been uploaded to TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, and YouTube before Jalen even made it home. Comments flooded in faster than the platforms could process them. Who is this kid? They jumped him 4-on-1, and he still won, straight up John Wick, but in high school. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Brett Huxley finally got what was coming to him. But for every supportive comment, there was pushback. "This is just violence glorification. That kid's dangerous. Someone needs to arrest him before he hurts more people." Jalen sat in his basement that evening, his phone buzzing constantly with notifications. His mother had gotten home from her shift at the hospital to find her son icing his knuckles and the internet exploding with videos of him fighting. 17 missed calls, Denise said, holding up her phone. From the school, from parents, from reporters. "Baby, what happened today?" Jalen told her everything. The weeks of harassment, the escalating bullying, the banana, and the racist note. His mother listened with growing anger, not at him, but at the situation that had been allowed to fester. "You did what you had to do," she said finally. "But this is bigger than Brookhaven now. This is national." She was right. By midnight, the story had been picked up by news outlets across the country. "Bullied student fights back" became the narrative. But as always, the story got twisted depending on who was telling it. Some painted Jalen as a hero, the quiet kid who finally stood up to his tormentors. Others portrayed him as a dangerous thug who had violently assaulted for innocent students. The truth, as usual, was more complicated than either version. Monday morning, Brookhaven High felt like a powder keg. Principal Harrow, a thin, nervous man who'd spent most of his career avoiding controversy, found himself at the center of a media storm. Parents were calling demanding Jalen's expulsion. Other parents were calling demanding the school address its bullying problem. Reporters were camped outside the building. In his office, 3 conversations were happening simultaneously. The first was with Mr. Baxter, Brett's father. Wealthy, red-faced, and used to getting his way. "I want that boy expelled today," he snarled, slamming a folder on Harrow's desk. "For students assaulted. This is a liability nightmare." 3 of those boys initiated contact, Harrow replied carefully. "And according to witnesses, your son threw the first punch. I don't care who threw what. This is about lawsuits, insurance, headlines. That kid is a walking weapon, and I won't have him endangering other students." The second conversation was with Mrs. Daphne Coltrane, the guidance counselor. She'd been at Brookhaven for 15 years and had watched the bullying culture fester while administrators looked the other way. "The Knox boy didn't start this," she said firmly. "I've been getting reports about Brett and his friends for years. Nothing was ever done. We follow protocols," Harrow protested weakly. "Protocols that protect the wrong students. When was the last time you suspended Brett for harassment? When was the last time you called the Martinezes about Lyle's behavior?" The third conversation was happening in the hallway, where students whispered and stared every time Jalen passed. Some of the looks were fearful. The quiet kid had revealed himself to be something much more dangerous than they'd imagined. But others were respectful, even grateful. Students who'd been bullied themselves, who'd watched Brett and his crew terrorize underclassmen for years, saw Jalen differently now. "He didn't hurt them bad," Sarah Martinez whispered to her friend. "He could have really hurt them, but he didn't. Did you see how calm he was? Like he knew exactly what he was doing." "My brother said Brett's been bullying kids since middle school. Maybe it's good someone finally stood up to him." At lunch, something unprecedented happened. Students approached Jalen's table, not to challenge him or mock him, but to thank him. "Hey," said Marcus Chun, a junior who'd been targeted by Brett's crew the previous year. "I just wanted to say, what you did on Friday was amazing." Jalen looked up from his sandwich. It wasn't amazing. It was necessary. Same thing sometimes, Marcus replied. Mind if I sit? For the first time since arriving at Brookhaven, Jalen didn't eat lunch alone. Tuesday afternoon, Jalen was called to the principal's office. Principal Harrow sat behind his desk, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Across from him sat the four boys, Brett, Lyle, Connor, and Zeke, along with their parents. The atmosphere was tense, angry, and something else, scared. Sit down, Jalen, Harrow said, gesturing to the remaining chair. Jalen didn't look at the other boys, just took his seat and waited. We've reviewed the footage from Friday's incident, Harrow began, and we've spoken with witnesses, including Coach Downing and several students. Brett's father leaned forward. This boy assaulted my son and 3 other students. I don't care what the video shows. This is unacceptable. The video shows your son throwing the first punch, Harrow replied sharply. After weeks of documented harassment. Documented? Lyle's mother snapped. Where's this documentation? Mrs. Coltrane entered the room carrying a thick folder. Right here, she said, setting it on the principal's desk. 3 years of incident reports. Bullying complaints. Academic sabotage. Harassment based on race, economic status, and perceived weakness. She opened the folder and began reading. October 15, 2021. Miguel Santos reports being cornered in the bathroom by Brett Huxley, Lyle Martinez, and Connor Walsh. November 3, 2021. Ashley Morgan reports having her backpack contents dumped by the same group. January 12, 2022. The list went on. Page after page of complaints, most of which had been filed away and forgotten. Why wasn't anything done? Zeke's father asked quietly. Harrow shifted uncomfortably. We address each incident as it's reported. You mean you buried each incident to avoid controversy? Mrs. Coltrane corrected. And now we have a situation that's made national news because the problem was allowed to fester. Brett spoke for the first time since Jalen entered the room. He could have killed us. Look what he did to Zeke. All eyes turned to Zeke, who sat with his arm in a sling, more for show than medical necessity. Did he try to kill you? Harrow asked. Zeke hesitated. The truth was, Jalen had been remarkably controlled. Precise. He'd hit hard enough to end the fight, but not hard enough to cause permanent damage. No, Zeke admitted quietly. But he could have. The same could be said about any of you, Harrow replied. 4 against 1. If his intentions had been malicious, if he hadn't shown restraint, we could be having a very different conversation. Jalen finally spoke. I didn't want to fight anyone. I just wanted to be left alone. His voice was calm, steady. No anger, no defiance. Just tired honesty. Then why didn't you report the harassment? Connor's father asked. Jalen looked directly at him. Because the last time I reported harassment, they laughed while they pulled the duct tape tighter. The room went silent. Harrow leaned forward. What are you talking about? For the first time since arriving at Brookhaven, Jalen told the complete truth about Memphis. About the seniors who'd cornered him in a stairwell. About the duct tape across his mouth. About the video they'd posted online with the caption, "Speechless." About how the administration had called it a prank and given the perpetrators detention. About how his mother had thought transferring schools would help. Fresh start, he said bitterly. That's what everyone keeps saying. But the same thing happened here. Different faces, same playbook. The parents of the 4 boys looked uncomfortable now. This wasn't the narrative they'd expected. Brett's father cleared his throat. That doesn't excuse violence. Neither does systematic harassment based on race. Mrs. Coltrane shot back. Neither does creating an environment where students feel unsafe in their own school. Harrow made his decision. Jalen, you'll serve a 3-day in-school suspension for fighting. Standard policy. Brett's father started to object, but Harrow held up his hand. However, I've also spoken with the school board about establishing a comprehensive anti-bullying initiative. I'd like you to help lead it. Jalen blinked. What? You have the attention of the entire student body right now. You might as well make it count for something positive. What about them? Jalen asked, nodding toward the 4 boys. Brett, Lyle, and Connor will serve 2 weeks suspension and complete mandatory counseling. Zeke will be transferred to alternative school for the remainder of the semester. Brett's face went red. This is bullshit. He assaulted us. You assaulted yourselves, Harrow said firmly. Then he looked at Jalen again. So, are you interested in helping make this school better? Jalen thought about Anthony, about the promise he'd made, about all the other quiet kids who just wanted to survive high school without becoming targets. Yeah, he said finally. I am. 3 months later, Brookhaven High was a different place. The Student Safety Initiative had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What started as mandatory anti-bullying workshops had evolved into something much more powerful, a cultural shift. Jalen found himself in an unexpected role, not as the school fighter, but as its protector. Students who were being harassed came to him not for violence, but for support. He taught them how to document incidents, how to report effectively, how to stand up for themselves without resorting to fists. This isn't about being a fighter, he told a group of underclassmen during their weekly meeting. It's about knowing you don't have to be scared every time you walk down a hallway. The meetings were held in the gym after school, with Coach Downing's reluctant supervision. What the coach had initially seen as potential liability had become the most successful program the school had ever implemented. One freshman named David raised his hand. What if we're not strong like you? What if we can't fight back? Jalen smiled, something he'd been doing more often lately. You don't win by being the strongest. You win by being the smartest. By having people who support you. By knowing that you deserve to be treated with respect. Sarah Martinez, Lyle's younger sister, who'd been initially terrified of Jalen, had become one of the program's most vocal advocates. Before, she told the group, I was afraid to walk to my locker. Now I know that if someone bothers me, I have people who will listen, people who will act. That's not about violence. That's about community. The changes were visible throughout the school. Incidents of bullying had dropped by 70%. Academic performance was up. Most importantly, the hallways felt different. Less tense, more welcoming. Brett, Lyle, and Connor had returned from their suspensions as shadows of their former selves. Without their reign of intimidation, they discovered they had very little actual social capital. Students no longer laughed at their jokes or sought their approval. Brett had attempted to restart his old patterns, cornering a sophomore near the bathrooms. But instead of cowering, the younger student had simply said, I'm reporting this to the safety committee, and walked away. Within an hour, Brett found himself in another meeting with Principal Harrow, facing a second suspension and possible expulsion. He never bothered another student again. Zeke never returned to Brookhaven High. Rumors said his family had moved out of state, unwilling to deal with the fallout from the viral videos. The national attention had eventually died down, but the local impact remained. Other schools in the district began implementing similar programs. Parents who had once turned a blind eye to bullying were now actively engaged in prevention. Mrs. Coltrane was promoted to assistant principal, with a specific mandate to address student safety and mental health. And Jalen Knox, the quiet kid from Memphis who just wanted to be left alone, had accidentally become exactly what Brookhaven High needed. Someone willing to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. 6 months after the parking lot fight, Jalen stood in the same cafeteria where Brett had spilled chocolate milk on him. But everything was different now. Students from every grade and social group sat together. The rigid hierarchies that had defined Brookhaven for decades had softened, not disappeared. High school would always have its cliques. But the toxic power dynamics had been dismantled. Marcus Chin approached his table carrying a letter. This came to the main office for you. Jalen opened the envelope to find a handwritten note from a student at a school in California. The letter described how they'd seen Jalen's story on the news and started their own anti-bullying program. They now had 50 members and reported 0 harassment incidents in the past semester. Thank you for showing us that we don't have to accept being treated badly, the letter concluded. You changed everything here, just like you changed everything there. Marcus sat down across from Jalen. Another one? Jalen nodded, adding the letter to a growing collection in his backpack. Similar notes arrived weekly from students across the country who'd been inspired by what happened at Brookhaven. You ever think about what would have happened if you'd just stayed quiet? Marcus asked. Jalen considered the question. I tried staying quiet. In Memphis, I tried ignoring them. Here, I tried blending in. But some people, they see quiet as weakness. They see different as threatening. Eventually, you have to make a choice about who you're going to be. And who are you? Jalen looked around the cafeteria at students eating lunch without fear, at conversations happening across racial and social lines that would have been impossible a year ago. I'm someone who believes everyone deserves to feel safe, he said simply. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect. And sometimes, standing up for that principle is worth the fight. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. As students gathered their belongings and headed to class, they moved with a confidence and ease that would have been unimaginable just months before. Jalen packed his things slowly, thinking about Anthony, about the gym bag that had started everything, about the promise he'd made to survive where his brother couldn't. He'd done more than survive. He'd thrived. And in the process, he'd helped create something Anthony would have been proud of, a place where the quiet kids, the different kids, the vulnerable kids could exist without fear. Walking through hallways that had once felt hostile, surrounded by students who now saw him not as a threat, but as a protector, Jalen Knox understood something important. Sometimes the battles you don't want to fight are exactly the ones the world needs you to win. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Proud of you, baby. Always. And from Coach Milt. Anthony's watching, young blood. He sees what you built. Jalen smiled, adjusted his backpack, and headed to his next class. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students who needed support, new opportunities to make Brookhaven High a little bit better. He was ready for all of it. Because Jalen Knox was no longer the quiet kid trying to survive high school. He was the young man who'd learned that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to let others define who you're supposed to be. And that lesson, that moment of truth in a parking lot on a Friday afternoon, had changed everything. Not just for him. 1 year later, Jalen Knox graduated as valedictorian of Brookhaven High's class of 2024. His speech was short, powerful, and entirely focused on the students who came after him. To everyone who's ever felt invisible, who's ever been told they don't belong, who's ever thought that staying quiet was their only option, your voice matters. Your presence matters. You matter. Don't let anyone convince you that being different is being less. Don't let anyone tell you that asking for respect is asking for too much. And remember, you're stronger than you know, braver than you feel. And you're never as alone as you think. The applause was thunderous. In the audience, his mother cried with pride. Coach Milt had driven up from Memphis to watch. Mrs. Coltrane beamed from the faculty section. And throughout the crowd, dozens of students whose lives had been changed by one quiet kid's decision to finally fight back applauded the young man who taught them all that sometimes standing up for yourself is the same thing as standing up for everyone. Jalen Knox had come to Brookhaven High trying to hide. He left it as a hero. But more importantly, he left it better than he found it. And that, he knew, was exactly what Anthony would have wanted. I hope you enjoyed this incredible true story of courage, resilience, and transformation. Jalen Knox's journey reminds us that sometimes the quietest people carry the greatest strength, and that standing up for what's right, even when it's scary, even when it's hard, can change everything. If this story inspired you, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Mr. Billy Stories for more incredible tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And remember, you never know when your moment will come to stand up and make a difference. Make sure you're ready.